Hi. In this lecture, I want to talk about a very fascinating and unique phenomenon in Africa, which is the formation of a new goddess, in this case, the Mami Wata. Something that is born out of the interaction between Africa and other cultures. It's nothing that's unique, indigenous to Africa, like the Shango cult. The Mama Wati is born out of a whole series of different curious interactions and interpretations of Western and Eastern world outside the borders of Africa. To begin with, the Mami Wata is really a female figure that has its origin most likely in the mermaids that sailors had on their ships, and possibly tattoos or other objects. Western sailors arriving in Africa would have had these figures, and it would have been a curiosity, something that provoked a kind of mystery and fascination in among the African peoples that they encountered. And it was through this sort of mystery of the origins of the mermaid that Mami Wata deity is sort of born. And we see here shrines to these figures, effigies, even an actual figure mast of a mermaid and a part of a shrine. As you can sort of see in the black and white photograph to the right, there is this ship figurehead in the shrine itself. So why were the ships and these objects, these mermaids, a fascination that provided a venue for this creation of this deity? Well, you must understand, when the Westerners arrived, there was something miraculous in their arrival. Of course, the extraordinary wealth that they carried with them, their ability to depart and traverse great distances. So they attributed their powers in part to this deity that they believed was featured so prominently in their art and in their culture. And so we start to see the Mama Wati, the Mami Wata, sort of emerge in other aspects of traditional African culture, like this Yoruba Ifa Divination tray. You can see here the sort of fish-tailed female figure that is opposite the Orunmila face, which is sort of the more traditional deity to appear on an Ifa divination tray. Where the image and icon of the Mami Wata really comes into focus is through a really remarkable series of coincidences. It begins with a circus performer, Mala Dama Majute, who was a snake handler from India, who was performing in Europe and appeared in Hamburg, Germany in 1887. And the image of her, this exotic Hindu savage woman, was something that audiences were really fascinated. And the iconography of her was something that people found intriguing in Europe. Well, it's when this depiction of the snake charmer makes its way to Africa. The Adolf Friedlander Company made a lithograph of the snake charmer, originally published in the 1880s. And this arrives in Africa, and this becomes the dominant icon for this Mami Wata. It has all of the elements: the exotic foreigner, the strange clothing, the symbolism of the snakes entwining the body, seductive, trancing, dangerous. And this becomes the sort of classic icon that people embrace as the quintessential image of the Mami Wata. So this is what we see here is actually a reprint of the original image here in 1955 by the Sri Ram Calendar Company from Bombay, India. And a lot of what we're going to be looking at here, again, is in part this kind of circus performer from Hamburg, but also this very interesting connection with India that also seems to provoke a great deal of fascination in the representation of the Mami Wata. So see here the original lithograph, and here is, of course, a popular depiction of that image. And you see how closely it adheres to that original icon, and how this Senegal glass painting by Zoumana Seni is something that really sort of captures that idea in a more colorful, vibrant, and immediate way, in a very graphic and distinctive expression of this character. Even sculptural depictions of the Mama Wati tend to hold to this, and they're often seen now the Mami Wata with multiple arms, and she's likened to the Hindu goddess Lakshmi, who is the goddess of wealth and prosperity. So the Mami Wati has always been associated with wealth and prosperity. She's always had that connection to the Western sailors and their huge cargo and coming in and this enormous wealth, but also something seductive and foreign, and something coming in that is both kind of dangerous but powerfully alluring. Here we see also a very interesting depiction from Ghana or Togo from the early 20th century, the multiple arms, again evoking this idea of a kind of Hindu goddess, something exotic, something that has this sort of snake-like quality on the head. The figure here is meant to be both beautiful, attractive, but not in a dark-skinned way. Notice how light the color of the body is. Again, the sort of outsider character who is not of this culture. There have been a number of ways in which the Mama Wati has really popularized itself in a number of festivals. There was the Joli Masquerade in Sierra Leone. That was a phenomenon in the 1970s where people would build these fancy, elaborate crowns and headdresses, and she was figured prominently in those parades. The Mami Wata here was sort of a painted wooden mask, and several face masks were attached to the structure, which is worn on top of the head in a fully dressed performer. You see wearing white. And again, here, there's a sense of a fertility cult, something of abundance, but also something the strange and miraculous, something just outside what is familiar and ordinary. Here's another interesting interpretation of the character. They notice the traditional dress on the female figure and the more established Western style dress, clearly darker skin, this kind of different races represented here between the two figures in this icon. And again, the snake held over the head and wrapped in the arms around the neck. This is this sort of common feature that we see from that very early icon. Here again is another representation of the Mami Wata by Joseph Chukwuwu from Nigeria in 1975. And here he's actually attached a light-colored brown hair wig onto the figure, giving it a creepy naturalism, accentuates the light skin of the female figure, wearing this bodice circus outfit, and again the snake entwined from below and around the arms, giving it powerful presence. Here's another image. The Mami Wata is, of course, always associated with water, as a water spirit emerging out of the water, and is an important part of the connecting to this idea. And again, we have here this wig that's being used on the head of the figure to give it this kind of Western, seductive, straight-haired, exotic appeal. Nigerian shrines, there are all kinds of different Nigerian shrines that have emerged out over the time. You can start to see some really fascinating ways in which the Mami Wata is appropriated into mystical practices, but become transported over across into the Americas in the magical practices of voodoo and voodoo. A number of contemporary artists have been fascinated by the image of the Mami Wata. Philippe Mulongoi from the 1950s, the Lumbumbashi, was of early Western style painting lab, and here he's created his own interpretation of this figure. The Siren, which is this idea of the seductress that comes from Greek mythology, someone who will lure you away from things. Probably one of the most famous artists, contemporary artists, to take up the idea was the early work of Cherry Samba, who was a painter who took a real fascination in this character and did a whole series of paintings in these sort of weird, surreal landscapes where this woman here is enticing our artist, you see up in heaven surrounded by angels, and he is being drawn into this woman with her book of black magic, and again, the snake winding around her arms. Here is a later work where Cherry Samba's style is a little bit better defined. He is really a painter who gets his training from barbershop signs. So there's a kind of slickness, and look at the incredible attention to detail that he's given to this woman and her hairstyles. Barbershop signs is one of the ways in which painters today can get and make a living. And Cherry Samba began his work sort of applying his trade and learning his skills by doing this. You can see the treatment of the figure and the hair and the face bows to all these ideas of Western taste and Western hairstyles that have become all the vogue. And here, again, Cherry Samba puts himself in the picture with his back turned, reading the Bible, trying to look away from the powerful black magic seductress with her book of talismans. Other artists have taken up the image as well. Shula, when the siren amuses herself, you see painting, strange way, her tail breaking through the painting that she's working on. This is wine and Western foods and this seductive way that she looks back at us. More violently, we can see F. Nede Mambamunto from the Congo. He shows how she is pulling him under, drowning him. Even the snake is assisting in the restraint of him, the artist in this picture. As I mentioned earlier, this idea of the Mami Wata does not belong just to Africa. It has gone over to the Americas, and here you can see an icon. In the Americas, it's lost some of its sort of original exotic strangeness, and it's become integrated into these Afro-Catholic traditions of this region, where people worship these figures along with other saints from the Catholic Church. Here you see a figure of the Mami Wata in Brazil. The priest and shrine idea also made it to the Americas, and here a voodoo priest is got a shrine to the Mami Wata, and in his shrine he has actually included the photograph of Natasha Kinski by Richard Avedon, and it's this way in which that picture so beautifully encapsulates the ideas of the Mami Wata and that sort of exotic strangeness, the boa constrictor and the seductive, sinuous qualities of the figure. Another contemporary artist who's done from the Americas is the Dominican Republic, has used this figure as a way of commenting on the seduction of women and bondage, and this ways in which the idea we are drawn to these compelling images. And this is often the way that she has been depicted in popular culture as a way of commenting on the way popular culture and the way in which our life full of Western ideas and values are deeply steeped with this presence of seduction. Another very interesting artist from South Africa, Claudette Schroeders, and I'll talk a little bit about her later when we get to talk about contemporary art in South Africa. Claudette Schroeders does these small fascinating, intimate views of wooden sculptures, sort of human interactions and dramas. And they're quite poignant and surreal. In her wooden statue, The Lost Girl from 2000, you see how she's commenting on the idea of the Mami Wata in not a conventional way, with the big breasts and the aggressive stance and the staring directly out at you. In this case here, we see a modest figure holding arm in front of her body, her hand open, almost pleading for sympathy and compassion, instead of powerfully wrought snakes writhing around her body. We see this rather timid little snake creeping up around her waist. And this is a very interesting, poignant commentary on this. How much of this idea of the Mami Wata is part of the male fear of female sexuality?